This Real Agriculture podcast is brought to you by Genesis Fertilizers. Nitrogen fertilizer is your farm's #1 expense. Farmers are working together through Genesis Fertilizers to solve the problem of high prices and security of supply by planning a state-of-the-art nitrogen plant. Security and earnings through ownership is the solution. Visit Genesis today at genesisfertilizers.com to learn more.
I'm Shaun Haney, and this is RealAg on the Weekend. Let's get real and get connected with the week that was in Canadian agriculture. RealAg on the Weekend starts now. Welcome to RealAg on the Weekend here on 650 CKOM and 980 CGME. I'm Shaun Haney of RealAgriculture.com. It is great to be with you here on this show, and I hope you're having yourself a great first week of January. It was a short week, kind of a, weird news week. We did not exactly light the world on fire when it came to just news in general, and it seemed like a bit of a slow one because a bit of an annual event where there's so much controversy about what the Prime Minister did with his holidays. So, it feels like a bit of an annual affair, if you can put it that way. Okay, so if you have any feedback, always we want to hear from you. What are some of the issues and thoughts that you have? Maybe you got a bit of a burr under your saddle. Always want to hear from you out there across Saskatchewan, anybody listening out there on the podcast or on streaming. My email address is shaney@realagriculture.com, or you can always find Real Agriculture across all the different social media platforms, or you can always call the RealAg feedback line. Now, that number is 855-776-6147. Today, we're going to dig into a number of different issues, kind of all markets related for the most part. We're going to talk about canola and wheat. Lindsay Smith of Real Agriculture talked to Brian Voth of IntelliFarm earlier this week. And this is kind of interesting to me because obviously the overall market commodity complex is very much driven by corn. And quite frankly, we want corn to lead us to the upside. Okay? You never want wheat to be the one that does that. But there's just a lot of dryness through a lot of the wheat belt in North America. And I just wonder, I do really, really wonder if there's a bit of a good story to be told when it comes to wheat. Well, we'll see what Brian Voth has to tell us here today on the program. We've also got some audio with Saskatchewan's own Ann Wasko, the Gateway Livestock Exchange, as well as Kevin Greer out of Guelph, Ontario. Both people we asked this week about protein demand. Okay, and there's some economic numbers out, and I'll get to those in a second here to sort of set a bit of the stage. But we've got a lot of protein to chew through, and we cannot afford an economic downturn domestically or outside of North America, as we need there to be strong demand, or else I think we got some real fundamental problems. Okay, so we'll talk about that today. We've also got a feature with Western Canadian's own MacDon from our Agritechnica coverage. And if you have not seen our Agritechnica coverage, I encourage you to go to realagriculture.com, or of course go to the Real Agriculture YouTube channel. We're putting out 4 to 5 videos a week from November's big show in Hanover, Germany. That of course was brought to you by Optimum Gly, a new canola trait technology from Corteva Agriscience. And MacDon was one of the features. It was kind of neat because MacDon was the header on the new New Holland Combine that was unveiled at the show. So that was kind of a cool Canadian story for a real global launch. We stopped at the MacDon booth and had a quick chat with him about just what's going on at MacDon and why they're so excited about some of the products that they have in the marketplace and kind of how things how they see the current environment. So looking forward to that as well. So we had a jobs number out on Friday. Canada had about 100 net jobs. Not good. Might as well just said flat, basically flat. U.S. much stronger, over I think it was like 217,000 new jobs from December. It is the lowest new job number, or if you look at, I think it was 2.7 million jobs were created in 2023 in the U.S. That's the lowest annual number since 2019. Of course, never mind what happened during the pandemic. So the U.S. economy is showing a little bit more strength than the Canadian economy. Canadian unemployment held at 5.8. We did see wage growth in both countries. I kind of wonder, and I think this does give a bit of an indication to the central banks right now that maybe just because we can lower rates doesn't mean we should. And I think that sort of sticky unemployment number, it seems like it's been relatively flat here through the Q4 of 2023. And I just wonder if that number doesn't go higher, that's going to be, it has to go higher for them to say, hey, we got to lower rates. And there's also there's a little bit of this circle here. If inflation cools and we have wage growth, companies can't pass on that increased cost to consumers through inflation and the excuse of inflation. And so that's when we start to get some tightening when it comes to the job market, because we'll have layoffs, because people got to meet the profitability goals. So I think there's some real questions about which direction the economy goes here in 2024. And we're going to talk about protein demand a little bit later on in the show, and that factors into all this, okay? It's all a part of this discussion. So these are the things that are really bonking around in my mind as I travel really across Canada and the U.S. right now with so many conferences and shows going on. This week I was in Ridgetown, Ontario for the Ontario Ag Conference, the Southwest Ag Conference in Ridgetown. I've been to the show numerous times. It is, pretty soybean corn focused, of course, based on where it is in Ridgetown. There is some wheat peats there, part of the organizing committee, and from our team. And of course, there is discussions about wheat there as well. It is one of the top-notch agronomy conferences in our country, for sure, without question. It is loaded with experts from both Canada and the U.S. If you ever are thinking about taking in an agronomy conference, that is one that will stretch your mind a little bit. I think it's second to none. So I encourage you maybe at some point to check that out. I gave the keynote address. It was the big keynote at lunch on Thursday. It was great. We talked about effective farm management. I had put out some tweets asking people, how do you define that? What does that mean to you? I had numerous Saskatchewan farmers, Jake Legui being one of them from Fillmore. I used some of his tweets. There were others, and it was really a good time. I think this is a topic, especially if margins get tighter on the farm, this is where management shows itself. There's operational management, of course, and there's also strategic management, and those two things have to work together. They're not the same thing, but I do believe that this is where we sort of separate the wheat from the chaff from a management perspective, so to speak. And when margins are lofty, it's anybody can do it. Let's be honest, right? It's some dumb decisions are hidden, right? They're sort of they're masked. But I think that, and if the banks start to tighten on farm loans and try to make sure their books are as clean as possible, if you know what I mean from that perspective, management's one of those criterias. And of course, a strong balance sheet is going to get you through a lot of different messes. But management, if they take that management question a little bit more seriously, that's gonna cause some problems for some people. So I think this is an area where we really can work on it as an industry. So I got some great feedback from the keynote. We went through a number of different pillars like vision and key performance indicators and HR, and it was really good. Of course I had some sports analogies in there like you would expect. But it was a great time. I really appreciate the people at the Southwest Ag Conference for having me as their lunch keynote speaker this week. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to hear some market commentary from Brian Voth of IntelliFarm. You're listening to RealAg on the Weekend here on 650 CKOM and 980 CGME.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
There's a reason we call it the Corn School. Videos on everything from planter setup to weed control, field trial results, and the latest yield strategies. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com has the information and advice you need to help you succeed. Brought to you by Pride Seeds and BASF. Corn School episodes are available at cornschool.com, from RealAgriculture.com, or as a podcast in your favorite podcast app. Check out the latest Corn School episode today.
I think something that's really interesting that's developed here right now is the question about the direction of the market. And obviously there's the whole corn and soybean discussion. That does drive a lot of the direction that we go from here. But there's another part of this too, is what about specifically to Western Canada? Because we have something that is transpiring here right now that I think is making me really question on how committed I am. Because if I was to go back, say, 3, 4, 5 months, I would say I was more, as I talked to tons of analysts, there's a lot of discussion about the downside, and that's still there, especially from a global demand standpoint. But what keeps on circulating in my mind is this dry bias that we have, what I'll call the North American wheat belt. Western Canada, through places like Kansas, down Montana, this whole stretch, it's not a great situation. And so when I think about wheat, are the conditions there? And of course, wheat is growing around the world. We all know that. We're not the only source of wheat. But I gotta wonder, what does all this mean for the direction of wheat? And a part of this also, of course, this also impacts a crop like canola. And obviously, we've got an acre discussion to debate, but we also have a production number to kind of debate. And this is, of course, all happening before we even put a single seed in the ground. This week, earlier on RealAg Radio, Lindsay Smith talked to Brian Voth of IntelliFarm. They chat about wheat and canola to get Brian's insights and thoughts on what's exactly happening in the wheat and canola market. Here it is.
Canola has really taken it on the chin relative to some of the other commodities, like especially compared to soybeans here in the last little while. And we have dropped back down to, we're not actually quite back down to where we were at the end of May, which, I don't know, maybe feels like a repressed memory for some people because, yeah, it was end of May. We were actually down to like 625 futures on the March chart I'm looking at, before we rallied back up to, over $800 a ton. And it was unfortunate. It was a really bad set of timing for this, because that rally up in July, we were like, yep, good. We can sell $18, $19 canola, whatever it was. Like, awesome, let's do this. At the exact same time, clients were calling saying, no, we got to cut our yield expectations in half. We're not going to have a crop. We're not selling anything else. And it's unfortunate because our hands were tied. We can't do anything about it, obviously. We have to keep that production risk in mind. The frustrating part is then to get to harvest and have yields that were better than what we were originally budgeting off of to begin with. Mm-hmm. Now, that said, I've looked at it a little bit here in the last few days, and if you pencil in, $18 canola that you could have sold back in July, but you're using, let's just say a 30 bushel yield or something like whatever, like a 2/3 of a normal yield, versus, today we're sitting down at like $14, something like that, canola, maybe $15 canola for spring. But a lot of farms ended up pulling off, 45-ish bushel canola. I'm talking Southern Manitoba, obviously, just so that I don't get, blasted over this for saying some of these numbers. But, from a purely financial perspective, farms are still actually better off today, despite the fact that prices of canola are, $4 a bushel lower. The yield versus what was being penciled in July has far more than made up for the drop in price.
Mm-hmm.
But, what do we tend to focus on? It's like, well, it's $14 canola. This is like poverty canola now compared to July.
Yeah.
And I think it's just an important thing to look at sometimes and keep in perspective. Also, just in perspective that $14 canola, if you go back outside of the last 3.5 years, $14 canola you would have dreamt about selling your entire life.
Yep.
So,
yes.
Just, yeah, another thing to keep in mind.
Okay, but it is like, this is the part of the discussion where we talk about that emotional and sort of those head games, the mental sort of fortitude you need to be able to exactly that, have these very clear conversations, run the numbers of like, it might feel worse to take $14 canola, but you gotta take it all the way through the entire math problem to see that maybe $14 isn't so bad.
And this is where I think my clients might get annoyed with me saying that I don't really care how you feel about it. Math is math, and math doesn't lie. So.
Oh, I don't care about your feelings, says Brian. Okay, let's touch on wheat.
Neither does the market. So.
No, okay, so that is the key point, though, right? Exactly. You're dealing with a market that does not care what you've sold at in the past, or what you have in the bin, or what your cost of production is. The market does not care. You've just got to make the decisions that are right for your farm and your cash flow. So there you go. All right.
On the plus side here for canola,
yes,
I will say that given where we have dropped down to at this point, and looking at canola relative to soybeans and canola crush margins, there should be, I've got to wait and see if this actually happens or not, but these prices should be encouraging a lot more demand at this point already, because canola is now actually undervalued as an oil seed, where the last 3 years we were super overpriced.
Super expensive. Yeah.
So if you're looking for a silver lining, I would say that's probably it, that we have probably dropped to a point that there should be a lot more interest showing up for Canadian canola now.
That's a positive, Brian. Look at that. You did it. You pulled out a positive, a good news story. Okay.
Yeah.
Should we just end there?
It wasn't quite the positive sandwich thing, like
the good, bad, good sandwich. Yeah. We got to work on the good, bad, good sandwich.
This was the cherry on the top, I guess.
Yeah, there you go. That's of, oatmeal. Okay, yeah, it's still not cake. It's oatmeal. Let's talk wheat before we wrap up. Let's talk wheat.
Wheat, it's been an interesting 24 months, or 23, I guess, since Russia invaded Ukraine, and that has led to some pretty wild wheat markets. Again, there too, like when we had that $5 a bushel rally in February, March, April of 2022, there's just been a lot of, I guess, I don't know, complacency is maybe the best word. Everybody got very comfortable with double-digit wheat prices, and we're sitting here and going like, this is ridiculous. Like, there's no way that this lasts. And then, and then you see some other people talking about, wheat's going to like 20 or $25 a bushel. I'm like, okay, but how many bushels do you have to sell to get there? Yeah. And I don't know. It was really good for, basically 1 or 2 crop years. But now that we're back into, again, and this even sounds dumb to say, like we're talking about $9 wheat today, let's say in southern Manitoba. Well, prior to 2022, $9 wheat, you could count on one hand how many times you ever saw it.
Yeah.
And it's just something to keep in perspective. And that has nothing to do with not saying anything about profitability of it, because wheat right now is basically back to a rotational crop. Trying to pencil in a profit on, $8.50 or $9 wheat is extremely tough to do, unless if you have a very, very tight budget on, not so much on your seed chemical fertilizer, but more so on your fixed costs. Yeah. If you run a very, very tight ship on that one, you can probably pencil out a profit, but it's going to be tough and you need the yield. So, but this is not untypical of wheat. Again, if you look back at wheat prior to the last few years, that's always been the case on wheat.
That was Lindsay Smith of RealAgriculture talking to Brian Voth of IntelliFarm from the RealAg Radio podcast this week. Okay, now that we've talked about the markets, we're going to continue RealAg on the weekend. And up next, we're going to talk a little bit about protein demand and sort of try to sort out what is in front of us here for beef and pork specifically. You're listening to RealAg on the weekend here on 650 CKOM and 980 CGME.
The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is your one-stop shop for everything a canola grower needs. Check out our free video series on YouTube for all the latest in canola agronomy, research, marketing, and more. Don't have time to watch? Download the podcast version of the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com or anywhere you download your podcasts. Stay on top of all things canola with the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by BASF and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
The next generation is the future of agriculture, but how do we launch from one role to leading? From succession planning and family dynamics to understanding finances and making the tough calls to discovering paths others have taken all through agriculture, the Successors Podcast covers it all. Tune in with me, your host, Kara Oosterhuis, simply by searching The Successors on your favorite podcast platform, or you can find it by visiting www.realagriculture.com.
Whether you're seeding, harvesting, or anything in between, the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com has you covered. Timely agronomic information from industry experts available online anytime. Give your wheat crop a good start and a great finish with the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by C&M Seeds, Syngenta Canada, and the Alberta Wheat and Barley Commission.
I know you probably got fertilizer on your mind as we start to get a little bit closer to the 2024 growing season. Nitrogen fertilizer is your farm's #1 expense. I probably don't need to tell you that. Farmers are working together through Genesis Fertilizers to solve the problem of high prices and security of supply by planning a state-of-the-art nitrogen plant. Security and earnings through ownership is the solution. Visit Genesis today at genesisfertilizers.com to learn more. Okay, we're going to talk about protein demand, and this is something you heard me at the beginning of the show talk about some of the economic factors and why I'm tying this to protein discussion. And earlier this week, Lindsay Smith of Real Agriculture sat down and chatted with Kevin Greer, who is a longtime market analyst for cattle and for pork, and she talked about demand. Here's what he had to say.
Well, you know, one of the key factors over the last few years has been demand, consumer demand for these proteins. And during the 2020 through 2022, whether it's because of more government money or the fact that we were shopping more at the grocery store rather than at food service, whatever the reason, demand was fantastic for beef, chicken, and pork. It didn't follow through especially for pork, to my surprise, into 2023. Demand for pork fell way off those levels of 2020 through to 2022. And the net result was that hog and pork prices fell at the farm level and at the packer level. So I guess that's a long way of me saying demand is critical here. And demand for beef held pretty good in 2023, but it wasn't as great as it also was in 2020 and 2022. Even chicken demand fell off a bit. So I don't see demand being record strong in 2024. So that should result in some lower pricing pressure. On the beef side, though, you remember we're in the midst of herd liquidation. Herd liquidation is going to continue in 2024, at least until the fourth quarter. So there's going to be a lot of pressure on the beef side because supplies are going to continue to go down. And that's going to put upward pressure, but at the same time, demand is probably easing back, which means that those peaks that we saw in recent years are probably behind us. On the pork side, again, we've got a lot of production. You know, that December hogs and pigs report was a big disappointment for people in the industry that were watching it, hoping for expected declines in the herd, and they just didn't materialize. So we've got still some big kills, big production of pork coming at us, and like I say, demand it looks to be good, but not again those peaks that we saw in 2021, 2022. So that's the factor. I guess it's a reasonably way out of saying probably a little less upward pressure, but for all the wrong reasons, at least if you're a hog producer.
Absolutely. It has not been an easy time. So okay, last question then, and if pork demand is, good but not great, and beef demand dropping off, chicken also not stellar, what the heck protein are people eating? And please say lamb.
Yeah, but I don't want to get misunderstood. Demand is very good, okay? It just fell off those extraordinary, head-scratching peaks of 2020 through to 2021. And, that's so I don't want to leave the impression that demand for the proteins is poor, because it's not. It's very good. It's just not the stellar that it was before. Okay, so because I've seen demand being poor over my career, and from in recent years, not counting the most two, it's been really, really good. And I think 2023 was good demand as well, just not stellar.
Not the making new records or anything like that we perhaps did see more recently.
That was Kevin Greer, based in Guelph, Ontario. It's funny, Lindsay's a sheep producer, and she could not get Kevin to bite there on the fact that lamb was all of a sudden this protein that everyone was being driven to. She couldn't get him to bite at all. That was pretty good. Okay, I also talked this week to Ann Wasko, the Gateway Livestock Exchange, and Ann and I talk every 2 weeks for the beef market update, and you can find that podcast at RealAgriculture.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And we also chatted about this topic of demand. Here's what Ann had to say.
I think the other key point that we want to talk about as we start off the year, which is not going to really help things, is both the U.S. and Canada, we've got carcass weights running at record levels. So the U.S. steer weight last week, 942 pounds. That's up 22 pounds from a year ago. And in Canada, Shaun, we're at a record 989 pounds. That's 50 pounds heavier than a year ago. And we've put on 30 pounds in the past month in terms of steer carcass weight. So, yeah, there's some big cattle going through the packer right now, and it's showing up in spades. So it just, in a nutshell, if you haven't put the pieces together, it just means every time you kill a steer, it's that much more beef to sell at the other end, and that just really causes a drag on the market. We've got to get through a lot of product here.
Yeah. And when we talk about concerns about demand, and listen, and that ship is like, that is not written in stone yet what demand's going to be like. But there is, like you said, there is some concerns out there when we've got the amount of tonnage that is going to be processed. We can't afford right now, one, a slowdown in domestic consumption, or any sort of disruption from an export perspective.
Those points, and then even bringing it closer to home, Shaun, we want to make sure these packers are getting through and not backing off their kills. So like we talked about, packer margins going back into the red. Does that, did we slow down production pace at all? That's exactly what we don't need. Yeah. So things to watch, Shaun, if you're out there watching data and numbers, we want to see the weekly kills staying high, whether it's fed cattle or non-fed cattle. We've got to get through supplies here in the first quarter.
We've got some data on November retail prices in Canada.
Yeah, if you thought you were spending more money at the store for beef in Canada in November, these are November average prices from StatsCan. The beef price was up 11% from last year for November versus the previous November, so at $21.75. Pork prices in November were up 5% in Canada at retail, and chicken prices actually dropped 2% from the previous November. So interesting move, but certainly beef leading the pack and ending the year about 6% higher overall from 2022.
We're going to need to see beef potentially being real featured at the grocery store in some of the flyers and some of the advertisements here.
Yeah, whether it's retail features, or it'll be interesting to watch and see, do we get some food service features? As it'll be interesting to see how end users try to move product when we've got these issues on the other end in terms of consumers and the economy, and if inflation's slowing down, but what's going on with employment and all those pieces. It'll just be interesting to see how things pan out as we go through the year.
Yeah, you said on the average up 11%. Is there any kind of cut that's kind of leading that? Like, is that hamburger or tenderloin?
No, good. Yeah, good catch. Good point out, Shaun. Certainly that rib, anything from the rib was up big time in November over October, whereas the ground beef price actually held just steady. So there was, if you saw more deals on ground beef, this data would confirm that, but you did not see many deals on rib products in November in Canada.
That was Ann Wasko, the Gateway Livestock Exchange, talking to me in this week's Beef Market Update. So if you add what Ann had to say to what Kevin had to say in this segment, I think there's things to be concerned about. We really need overall, we need domestic consumption to continue to be strong. Like you heard Kevin say, demand is down, but it's still relatively high. And it needs to be that way because of all the tonnage that Ann talked about. The other part of this too is and I said this in the discussion with Ann, is that we really need the export market to be strong. We really need Canadian and U.S. people that are in the area of market access to be very, very much pushing Canadian product. We need countries like Japan, like Vietnam, we're our major export markets. It would really help Canada if China was a big purchaser of Canadian beef. Of course, the U.S. is having some, they are shipping product into China, and that's one of our, we're competing. It's weird, right? Because in some ways, in many ways, we're integrated with the U.S. from a supply chain standpoint on beef. But then, and we're customers of each other, so we're very we're married to each other. Yet, from an export perspective, we compete toe to toe, right? So it's kind of fascinating on how competition does work. But we've got a lot of tonnage, pork and beef, and we're going to need the consumer to very much step up and pull through for us. Or we got some bigger problems in 24. Okay, let's take a break, and when we come back here on RealAg on the weekend, we're going to do a bit of a feature. We're going to show you or have you listen to a conversation that I had with MacDon at Agritechnica while we were over there in Germany, and it was a lot of fun. Of course, that show, you can find all of our coverage at RealAgriculture.com. We'll hear from MacDon when we come back. You're listening to RealAg on the weekend. Of course, we are here on 980 CGME and 650 CKOM.
I'm Lindsay Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomists, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomist with me, Lindsay Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by Pride Seeds, BASF, and Syngenta Canada.
Been to Agritechnica probably 4 times now, okay? And one of the things that has really just blown me away all 4 times, and it's a great grounding, and it's a great story, because this is the world's largest farm show. This is an exhibition that is like no other, okay? People from around the world. And Canada manufacturers show up so well. Like, there is high demand for products that Canadian manufacturers are making in tillage, in seeding equipment, and others that they demand. Canada is seen as a high-quality manufacturer. And one of the manufacturers that's been at Agritechnica for a number of years is MacDon. And we stopped at their booth, and we chatted with them. I want to mention that our coverage at Real Agriculture of Agritechnica is brought to you by Optimum Gly, a new canola trait technology from Corteva Agriscience. Here's my conversation with MacDon from Germany. And today we're in the MacDon booth, and we're joined right now by Miles, who's based out of Winnipeg. It's great to see somebody from back home. Miles, how are you doing?
Good. I'm doing good. Nice to hear someone in English.
Yeah. How many Agritechnicas have you been to before?
It's my first.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's my first. So it's been a new adventure. There's a lot of equipment here.
You're in for a very long week. It's going to be busy.
Yeah.
Okay, behind us here is MacDon, very famous for the flex draper. Talk about why you think it really has solidified that leadership position in the marketplace.
I think for us, for many years, I've been 35 years a flex draper now, and we've kept it simple. I think a lot of guys try to reinvent the wheel, and we've been pretty consistent all these years. We base ourselves off of our mechanical spring system, and it works consistently all the time. So I really think that's what's been able to set us apart.
So what is it about those springs that make it different?
It allows us to stay light off the ground. So our ground pressure, we can set it in certain conditions where you want it to follow the ground. We can set it a little bit heavier, so then it's pushing a bit more. But in other conditions, when it's wet years, that's kind of where we shine, actually. A lot of times, guys, anybody can cut. It's kind of like driving down a straight road. Anybody can drive straight. But you get into the tough conditions, and that's where we shine. The UK, it just shines there. Flat crops, and we're able to get underneath and pick up that crop, and it just looks nice and clean on the backside. And that has a lot to do with how we can float. So we can get under and without pushing. You get muddy conditions. A lot of the competitors end up pushing because you can't control that weight, whereas we do with our springs.
So a lot of people at the show are talking about that New Holland combine. There is a MacDon header, a 50-foot on the front of that machine. We've got a video on that at RealAgriculture.com of that machine as well. How much flex is there on the ends? Do you know how many degrees?
So we are 30% flex here. Now that's going to depend on. So I can't give you an exact figure off the top of my head, to be honest, but that's going to vary because a 25-foot is not going to have. It'll still give you 30%, but that inch change is going to change versus a 50-foot. So it's variable depending on the size of the header. But it does work out the math and percentage-wise. So yeah.
So across all crop types too, right? So whether we're getting down into those lentils or we're maybe cutting wheat a little bit higher, the flex draper really can fit any of those situations.
For sure, absolutely. We can set this up in rigid mode, so we can do the this standing wheat and get a nice even crop. We've had customers use this for hemp. Cut it up high off the ground, and then they come in and clean up the stalks after. So it's very versatile in that way. And then same thing, you can put it down into full flex, and you're down into the lentils and the peas and that. So we've got our Contour Max wheels, which is our new hydraulic wheels underneath. So while you're in the cab, you can adjust that stubble height. So you've got, as a good example, say wheat. You want 8 inches of stubble. You can set those contour wheels to set like that, and now you've got some that's laid over because the wind's blowing it over. You can raise the wheels and get down underneath, pick it up, and go right back to your 8 inches. So it's really versatile.
Brand agnostic when it comes to combines?
We're across the board on all major brands. So, yeah.
Great stuff. Well, Miles, have a great Agritechnica. Enjoy yourself, and take care of your back and your feet, okay?
My feet will be complaining for sure. Yeah, well, thank you for the time.
For the people that have to stand in those booths for that whole week, that is, you do need good footwear. There's people like us that are running around and doing 20,000 steps a day and trying to get all the coverage of the show. There's the farmers that are just kind of walking around in the crowded alleyways of the show through all the different halls. And then there's the people that got to stand in the booths. And, after a week, you're probably ready to get off your feet. I would think so. And like I said, I think it is a great Canadian success story, and it's mainly manufacturers from 2 provinces, Saskatchewan and Manitoba. Now, there are some from Ontario, of course, as well. But Saskatchewan and Manitoba, they represent our country so well in the global equipment space. And I think it's something that we kind of take for granted, I think, maybe a little bit, the innovation that is in our backyard. It's right here, right? We've got, and we've had some sales recently, like of course, Seed Hawk was sold to Vaderstad. Burgo was just sold to Linmar. And, but those are still successes. As somebody said to me, Bourgault being sold to Linamar is the largest exit of any company started in St. Bruce, Saskatchewan, right? So these are huge success stories, and I make sure you don't take it. You think about it and be proud as somebody from this country in terms of how we have really led from an innovation standpoint in both tillage and in seeding equipment, for sure. If you have any feedback on today's show, love to hear from you. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Make sure you go to realagriculture.com for all your information and insights on all things agriculture. Thanks so much, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with Real Ag on the weekend here on 650 CKOM and 980 CGME.